So we got an interesting topic today. We're going to focus on background checks. And if you own a company or you manage people or you're in an HR department, you probably have run background checks on your employees or potential employees. We're going to focus a lot on that and the different kinds of background checks that can be run and maybe should be run. My guest is Dave Sawyer. Dave is the founder of a company called Safer Places. He founded it back in 2004. He's got an extensive background in the security space. I believe since 1977, he's been in the security field, started his own company, like I said, 18 years ago. And he's going to help us dive deep into this topic and cover it from different angles. So Dave, thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Dave.
Absolutely. So just bring me up to speed, Dave. What caused you, first of all, how did you get into the security space? Let's just start there. How and why did you get into the security space?
So I think it's probably left over from when I was a kid and wanted to be a police officer like everybody else back then, or, police or fire or something. But so I was going to college and took a part-time job as a security guard, working the overnight shift. You get to study while you're getting paid, The bad news was you weren't getting paid a whole lot, but and then so I thought from there, maybe I could go from security guard to police officer. That sort of didn't work out. I could elaborate on that a little bit, but that's where it all began. Anyway, was a little boy's love of police cars and sirens.
Okay, all right. So what caused you to start Safer Places?
Well, I was working for a large property management company, and I was their VP of security. And we were doing all the things that my company does. We were doing background checks in-house. I have a security consulting division, and we were doing, consulting with the property managers of all the different properties across the country. And I've had an entrepreneurial bug for a long time. And I just thought, what I do for the company, my employer now is a good business model. It should work out. And my employer, I was very fortunate. They said, yeah, if you do it, we'll be your first client. So that made the launching a lot easier to have a nice client to start with.
Yeah, a lot of people don't have that fortune when they go off on their own. Their employer doesn't want anything to do with helping them out. So that's great. That's great. First client too. Tell me, just kind of set the table for what Safer Places does. I know you do background checks, but what kind of background checks, and is there anything in addition to that you do?
Well, sure. Yeah, so the background checks are customized. One of the things that I noticed in the industry was a lot of my competitors seem to have off the shelf, the blue collar package or the executive package, or, and so they would put together these packages and they maybe make a little sense, I guess, but I like to talk to a potential new client, find out what kind of positions they're hiring for, ask them a lot of questions about their company. What are the risks that are inherent to each one of the positions they're hiring for? Some of the obvious ones, if you hire someone that's going to be a delivery driver, obviously you want to check their driving record. So that's going to make the list. But a lot of times clients haven't really thought that through. So I really like talking with them and finding out, letting them know, educating them what's available for a background check. And the new thing right now is social media checks. Yep. Everybody's doing that on their own. Statistics that I've read say, upwards of 70% of clients admit that they check social media before they hire somebody. But there's a downside to doing it yourself. And so we talk about that with the client. And a lot of times they go, you know what? I didn't think about that. Yeah, let's add that to the package.
Okay. So, if you've got somebody who's hiring drivers, you'd want to know the driving record. Social media is more of just how do you spend your time, I would assume. But what about drugs or criminal or?
Yeah, so criminal is a whole subset all by itself, because everybody always says, yeah, I want to know if I'm hiring a criminal. Yeah. So, from there you go, well, how deep of a dive do you want to take? How far back do you want to look? Do you want to search the local courts in the areas where they've resided over the last 10 years? Mm-hmm. Do you want to add the federal courts? Do you want to do, a database search of a compilation of records from across the country? And again, it's just about educating the client, letting them know the pros and cons of each way that we can look for criminal records, and making sure that they're picking the option that works best for them.
Okay. And financial, you do one there as well, correct?
Well, we can pull a credit report.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't understand that credit reports for employment purposes are a little bit different than just a regular credit report. You don't see a credit score, for example. And so the upside is that you find out if a person, if they're going to be handling your finances, you want to make sure that they can handle their own, of course. I think that's one aspect of looking at financing. The other is, are they living beyond their means? Mm-hmm. And so the theory there would be, well, if they're living beyond their means and I see that they're making, this, $5,000 payment on their new yacht, I know I'm not paying them enough to do that. So, what else is going on there?
Right. I used to, when I first got into my first real job was in the mortgage industry. And that was the first thing we would have to do with anybody that wanted a loan of any kind, purchase, refinance, is run their credit report. And I did not understand entirely, other than, look, they have good credit, so therefore we can give them a loan. But I was talking to one of my colleagues who was training me, and he said, credit represents the character of a person. If they're going to go borrow money from somebody or any entity, do they have it within them to pay back? And if not, do they show and demonstrate a willingness to make a call and say, look, I've run into a problem. Can we work out a payment plan? Or do they just let it all go to crap? So I would think that it also is a credit report also demonstrates that. Do you get into that conversation at all, or is that just not how you think about it?
Well, no, we do. And a lot of what we offer, a lot of the searches that you could add to your screening package do have ancillary benefits that go a little bit beyond what you would just think of on the surface. So for credit, what you mentioned certainly makes sense. Also, things that people don't think about. A credit report often shows previous employers. And so if you're trying to hide, I work for XYZ company because I don't want them to know that because they're going to give me a bad reference. Credit report is a place where we often see that.
Interesting.
Another example of that would be the driving record. Even if this person isn't going to be a regular driver for you, one of the things that shows is date of birth. And so why is that important? Well, when we're searching for criminal records, the two main identifiers that we have to match up to make sure that when we report that so-and-so has a criminal record is a name and a date of birth. People often think of it as, well, the Social Security. That is usually redacted from court records, for privacy reasons. So the two main ways of making sure that when we report a criminal record, we get the right person is name and date of birth. Well, the bad guys know that. And so if they report an incorrect date of birth, that's going to increase the odds that we may miss a record that does belong to that individual. Well, when they got their driver's license back when they were 16 years old, they didn't know that they were going to be lying about this, because they're going to have a criminal record in the future. So that's probably the accurate date of birth is on the driving record.
Good to know. Good to know. All right. How's the industry evolved? You started in 2004. We're 18 years later. A lot has changed in our world in 18 years. Drugs have become legal. Mental illness is significantly on the rise. Massive public shootings have been on the rise since the mid to late 90s. And it's not just workplace. It's recreational. It's churches. It's everywhere. How does the background check? How has that evolved as the world has evolved?
Well, when you first said how's the industry evolved, I was thinking back to before I began 18 years ago, but even then there was still some of this going on in terms of the process. People were still faxing information and calling courthouses, and things were getting faxed. And I remember Alaska. I don't think they do this anymore. I hope not. But to get a driver's license in Alaska, we had to actually fax the DMV up there. And they would fax back the record. So a lot has evolved that way as well. But more to your point, probably what people look for in the background check, and we already talked about social media, but that's within the last few years. That wasn't even heard of 18 years ago. Nobody was checking social media, and so what people are looking for, and then I think also how they interpret the results, and people used to say, oh, felony conviction, red flag, automatic disqualifier. I don't have too many clients that do that anymore. Right. A felony isn't just a felony anymore. Now they want to know the rest of the story. And I think that's probably a good thing. Rather than just say it. The EEOC would agree with us, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. To them, that's a red flag, and you can get yourself in some hot water if you still are using those automatic disqualifiers. They want you to delve into it a little deeper and find out what the rest of the story is before you make that final hiring decision.
Right, and I've heard people over the last couple of years talk about background checks almost like as a way to discriminate, using them as a way to discriminate against somebody who has, a felony on their record or has a history of, say, drug abuse. Are you having to help coach them or help them interpret what this means, or are they already there on their own saying, no, we get it, and we're still open. We're not going to rule people out because of this?
Well, so we get into a little bit of coaching on that. I have to be careful. There's a fine line. I never went to law school, so I can't get legal advice. But we certainly do want to coach the client and make sure they're not getting themselves into hot water. I think the best tool that we have that we recommend to the client, and they can do this themselves and we can do it for them, is called an individualized assessment. And that's something that the EEOC came up with. They don't require it, but they strongly recommend it. And if it's a great defense, if somebody does come after you for discrimination based on the results of a background check, if you can show that you did an individualized assessment, that's a great defense in the eyes of the EEOC. Okay. And what that amounts to is just basically, you and I are probably old enough to remember Paul Harvey and the rest of the story. Yeah. So if we have younger people listening to this, they won't know what we're talking about. But the rest of the story. So a good example of that was we had a client that I think the charge was something like interstate transportation of firearms. And so, you look at that on the surface and you say, oh my goodness, this guy's probably a terrorist or, running guns for the mob or something. Sounds pretty serious. We did the individualized assessment and that's an accurate report. I was charged with that. It turns out his grandfather asked him to help him move. He took out stuff out of grandpa's attic and had it in the trunk of his car. And I don't know whether he knew it or not, but there was an antique gun collection in there. Oh boy. And he got pulled over for something and the police found that. And so, it makes a big difference to find out what the rest of the story is sometimes.
Oh, I bet it does. What about, in the notes here that I had, you had sent me some notes, but one of the things you commented on was just, and I know this because of the work I do, it's really challenging for organizations today to hire people. And a lot of them will say, they'll say to me, I can't even find people, which is probably their own problem, because there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people out there that are actively looking for work. I think the way in which they look for them might be broken rather than the people not being available. That said, the mindset is it's really hard to find people. And if they believe it's really hard to find people, and then you add a background check over and above that, a lot of them, like there's a hesitation. It's hard enough to find them, and God forbid they fail this thing. Do you find yourself in that conversation ever?
Yeah, I have some clients that I've talked to, and I've said, your background check is not that robust. And let me explain it. I have to be careful because, I don't want to come across as a sales guy trying to sell them more stuff, but I want to educate them and let them know, look, you could be missing criminal records that are out there because of the package that you chose. Yeah, you're saving money, but do you really want to do that? And so sometimes the answer I get is, we're not trying to save money, Dave. We don't want to have a lot of records come up because then we can't hire anybody. Right. That's their choice. And I understand that, but the flip side of that, you get a real bad actor in there, they can do all kinds of damage. I mean, not just, the dishonesty thing, maybe stealing from their employer or that sort of thing, but, the violence, if they're working with your clients, your customers, the damage to the reputation of your company could be insurmountable. if one of these catastrophic things that we hear on the news, happens at your employment. So that's the real damage. And I go back to the individualized assessment on that one.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if you're just disqualifying people because they have scary sounding things on their record, talk to them. And the other thing that we do with the individualized assessments is we ask them, well, what have you done to rehabilitate yourself since you've been convicted of this crime?
Mm-hmm.
If it's a drug-related crime, somebody had an addiction. So maybe they've been to rehab and they can demonstrate, 5 or 6 or 7 years of sobriety. Maybe there was an assault charge. The employer is concerned about violence in the workplace, so they might want to pass on this one, but then they do the individualized assessment and you find out, well, this guy's been to anger management classes. He had a job similar to the one he's applying to us for, the last 3 years, and he's been very successful in that. So there's really no reason to believe that he would be a problem for us. So the individualized assessment really, I think, oftentimes sheds new light on what otherwise looks pretty scary on a piece of paper.
Yeah, and I've experienced it. I come from the staffing industry. I spent almost 13 years in the staffing industry, and I've put hundreds of people to work, and then I've managed teams that have put a lot more than that to work, and then clients, et cetera. But as a younger person, I remember, I had one particular client. Every single person that went to work had to have an extensive background check, and occasionally they would let them in before the results would come back, and occasionally the results, something surfaced there, and I had. And it's tough because I'd have to make the call to the person without explaining anything. Something surfaced. Unfortunately, you're going to have to leave the assignment. I'm coming down there right now, and I'd have to explain this. But I remember one guy, I felt so sorry for him. It was a domestic situation, and he just came right out and said, "Here's what happened. It's been following me my whole life." I felt so bad for him, even though he admitted to doing it. He paid his price, but it never stopped following him. And I've also had situations where, I hired somebody to threaten my life, and the police had to get involved, and he threatened to do some, not to me directly, but he threatened to kill me and advise the people at the office not to come to work. And so we had to have him removed. I was so angry. I wanted to get him before he got me, but he was just a guy that was really, really conflicted. And and the crazy part is I never felt right about him, but I hired him anyway. And then we ended up in this situation. And the last one was, I had to remove a person who was harassing one of his female colleagues. And he was different. He used to talk a lot about his explosives license and all these things, and he passed his background checks and all that, but he made people uncomfortable. And I had to tell him, I might have been, 28 years old, and I had to go deal with him and collect his stuff and meet him in a parking lot. He pulled out the biggest knife I've ever seen. He literally reached into his sweatpants. He got out of his van, reached into his sweat and opened this knife. And I thought, I can't believe this is how this is going to end. I cannot believe I'm going to get killed in a Kmart parking lot by this guy. And he almost did it like as a shock, like to get a shock factor out of me. Instead of like acting alarmed, I said, "Oh my God, let me hold that thing." I said, that's the nicest knife I've ever seen in my life. Give me that thing. And I like ripped it out of his hands. And I'm like, where did you get this thing? And deep down, my heart is just pounding. But I had to remove him, and he didn't go away willingly. Like, he still kept asking questions and who said what. And I'm off on a tangent because that's my habit. But the thing is I guess where I'm going with it is there are things going on with people that people like me, maybe I wasn't equipped to really deal with that. Thank God nothing happened, and I was able to navigate my way through those situations. But those are real situations that could have been a lot worse. I look at what's going on, from Columbine on, the real bad stuff. Everyone knows it. Where's the line, Dave? Like, I know that's not on you to pick. It's still on the company, but where's the line? You just never know. And by the way, you can't discriminate.
Well, yeah. And the couple of things running through my head as you were speaking there. the social media, I think, so the guy that had the no record, I think the social media oftentimes, and I think that's why that's such a popular search for us to do now, because that sometimes shows, someone with no record, but somebody that you just, from talking to them that they're not quite right. Then that gets confirmed with the kind of posts and things that they like, on social media. And the advantage of a professional background screening doing it, first of all, we can do it using artificial intelligence, so it's a lot faster, right. Not as time consuming, but also we redact all the stuff that you don't want to see as an employer, like, their religious affiliation or sexual orientation, or, if somebody was just saying, oh, I'm so excited, we just found out we're expecting our first child. Well, and then you end up not hiring that person, and it turns out they know you check their social media, you're going to get accused of discriminating on grounds that you can't use in an employment situation. Right. So that is a big help there. The other things that the examples that I was thinking of, we had two come to mind, and one was, a lot of times when we're going through these individualized assessments on behalf of the client, I find myself secretly, I don't tell the client this, but I find myself secretly either rooting for the guy, hoping he gets the job, or hoping that the client makes the right decision and not hiring him. But this one, I was rooting for the guy. He was on the sex offender registry list. Mm-hmm. And he explained that when he was, I think, about early 20s, 21, 22 or something like that, he was dating a younger girl. He was a black man, she was a white girl. Dad found out that they were intimate together, and he was not happy. And he had the guy, he was older, and so it was illegal and statutory rape. Yeah. Sex offender was ordered to be on it for life. Now he's a man, and I think he's in his late 50s. So this was, over 30 years ago. He hasn't had any trouble since, but, like in your example, that followed him the rest of his life. Yep. I was rooting for the guy. My client ended up saying, no, it's our policy. He's on the sex offender registry. We just can't have that kind of negative publicity in our company, and they didn't hire him. We had another one. This was an executive level position. A guy was actually moving from one state to another, packing up his whole family, moving. He was going to be, in the multiple six-figure salary range. And we got a hit on the sex offender registry. And this guy, and I remember thinking, that's got to be a mistake. This is a professional guy. It can't be. Mm-hmm. So, I called him. That's one of the phone calls that my employees don't want to make. If they don't, I usually end up being the one to volunteer for those calls because they're awkward. So I called him and asked him about it, and he said, "Dave, I'll tell you the truth. I was in college. It was a big party. I used the great outdoors as a bathroom because I had a little bit too much to drink, so I got charged with indecent exposure." Yep. And I ended up on the sex offender registry list. So you say, well, okay, that sounds reasonable. I'd probably hire the guy, but something about it didn't sound quite right, because the guy was, I think he was in his late 40s, and you don't usually get required to register for life for an indecent exposure charge like that one. So we dug a little deeper until we could find the underlying case that caused him to get arrested and be on the sex offender registry list. And it turned out that guy was a terrific liar. And his original charge was actually indecent liberties with a minor. So that one was an easy decision for the client not to hire that one. But you just, on the surface, you don't know.
Well, you don't. And I go back to this discrimination piece. One of my I don't know why I have this interest. I'm so fascinated by crime. I'm fascinated watching crime shows, like real life crime shows, not because I like it. I'm just so amazed at how the mind works. And so often, more often than not, when I watch, whether it's a police drama, like a First 48 or a Dateline or a 2020, more often than not, the person that commits the crime, and not the crime you just described, by the way, but any crime, heat of the moment, whatever, makes a mistake. More often than not, I feel empathy for the person that did it. It was just a good person that made a bad decision in the moment and should pay the price for it, by the way, absolutely pay the price for it. But so there's like a level of, I feel this person should be given a second chance if they're sorry at some point, even if it's 50 years from now. Then there's other crimes that I don't believe that. And so can you discriminate against somebody, not the guy that innocently might have used the woods as a restroom? It's, not that, but are there exceptions? I mean, can you discriminate against somebody that's got a history of sexual, whatever, predatory behavior? I mean, I would think at some level, could I pay the price not hiring somebody like that? Or do I have the right not to hire somebody like that?
Well, you do have the right. The EEOC says that, you have to show a business necessity and some kind of a nexus to the position for which you're hiring. So, somebody with a sex offender registry or, some kind of a sex offense, if they're dealing with the public, especially if they're dealing with children, or, you have an HVAC repair guy they're going to be sending into people's homes. I mean, that's certainly an easy one to show that, as an employer, I have more of a duty to my clients to protect them than I do to, hire this guy. I think, I understand what you were saying, and I agree with you that, you do have empathy sometimes for some of these people, because, it's in society's best interest that everybody be employed. I mean, the rate of recidivism is going to be much higher if a person can't get gainful employment, can't support his family. Right. That's going to drive him to more crime. Yeah. So it's in all of our best interest to find jobs for people. But I guess, what I usually say is you have to find the right job. And, if I'm a sex offender, obviously I'm not going to work in a daycare situation. If I was charged with stealing and convicted of stealing, 2 or 3 years ago, you're not going to want to hire me to run your cash register for you.
Right.
But, if it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, I've can show a history of working, running a cash register, in recent history. And I've done so successfully. And I can show that I made a dumb mistake. Yep. And that's one of the things that we look at is, how long ago was it and how old was the person at the time? Right. I think back to some of the things I did, when I was 18 and 20 years old. I hope nobody does a background check and finds out those things.
Yeah, well, when you started talking about the guy, like I always think of that Seinfeld episode in the parking garage, and he gets arrested for the uromycetitis, whatever he called it. Like, oh my goodness! I mean, that could happen to me. Those are I would say, the least of our worries. That type of thing. I just, I wonder what's the impact on the person or the company that makes the decision to take the chance, and under what circumstances should you take the chance? And I guess it depends. It's all case by case. But if you do take the chance, you also are creating liability for your organization. Like in my example, the person who threatened my life that we had to move on from, who has since passed away, unfortunately, was a good person with problems. He didn't go away right away. So even after he left, I fielded calls from him for about a year, and he still harassed some of the people in the office for a period of time. Police had to get back involved. So there's a lot of you're even though you might be doing the right thing to help rehabilitate somebody, you're still putting yourself and others in a situation that maybe they're not equipped to deal with. We're not necessarily therapists and psychologists or psychiatrists, doctors. And how do you, if you're going to take their chance, are you prepared for what could happen? Not only from a liability perspective, but emotionally. Do you know how to deal with this? Because the problem doesn't just go away necessarily just because you took a chance. They don't work out. Sometimes they stay around for years. They don't leave you alone.
Yeah. And I guess ultimately it comes down to a business decision. And sometimes it's not an easy one. Sometimes you really got to feel for the employer trying to make the decision. And I think that employers today feel more pressure to be a little more lenient in their decisions because they're having such difficulty hiring people. Yeah. So I think that, like a lot of things in life, the pendulum swings back and forth. Yeah. And right now it's swinging, in the direction of, well, we need to be a little more lenient with our decision making for a couple of reasons. So, the one we just mentioned, I'm having difficulty finding good people, but also I think there's pressure from society right now to give second chances and to and not be so harsh with your decision making. So those are the pressures that the employers are faced with. I still have some clients that I know are hard and fast, and they now if there's anything that involves violence or dishonesty, and it's within the last 10 years, it's different for each client, but you draw a line somewhere. I still have some that do that, and I have others that are a little more, okay, let's hear the rest of the story and make an individualized assessment.
Yeah, I like the rest of the story piece, because I believe that you do have to understand before making any decisions. What I thought was, as I was reading about you this morning, actually, I kept thinking of the name of your company, Safer Places, and and I don't know if this is why you named it Safer Places, but when you think about what we need as human beings at the lowest level, at the lowest common denominator, we all need to feel safe. That whole Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Does that have any? Is that the reason you came up with the name of the company?
Well, yes and no. I mean, where the name actually came from was from my church. They had an initiative they called the Safer Places Initiative, and it was people that were volunteering in the church to work with children, teaching Sunday school and that sort of thing. And it was back, I don't know, probably 25 years ago now, that they started this initiative so that people would feel safer bringing their children into the church, and so people were getting background checked and vetted a little more, more so than they used to be. It's easy in a church to just check it if the person's breathing and has a pulse. Say, oh, good, we need volunteers. Come on in.
Yeah.
So that's where it came from, and I did my due diligence and checked and made sure they weren't using that name anymore, and it was okay for me to borrow it.
Right.
But it also, I thought it was a good description of what we help provide. I mentioned the other division we have, which is security consulting, and it's sort of, the name kind of fit both the security consulting and the background checks.
Right. And how do they tie together? Just give me a little bit more on that piece of the business.
Well, we work with clients to create safer places in terms of physical security, policies, procedures, things like that. The bulk of our work these days is actually with either new construction or rehabs, and designing security into the rehab or the new construction. And so working with architects, for example, in designing and writing the specs for the security systems, from an independent standpoint. We're not selling anything, we're not installing anything. So, we don't make any money, and we're just recommending what's best for, that client in their budget. And architects oftentimes don't have that expertise. So, they like working with us, and we provide that component.
When you say security, I'm guessing not only cameras, but lighting and things of that nature. Anything in addition to that?
Yeah, cameras, lighting, intrusion alarms, access control systems. Oftentimes, part of the design is getting the two systems or three systems to talk to each other, so they all work in harmony. So when you have somebody show up on camera doing something, you can just go in to one interface and find out what doors that person went through, and then and look at the cameras as they followed them around to as they pass from this area to that area throughout the facility. Just a lot of time saving when you get integrated systems all talking to each other.
Yeah, and the other reason I asked you about the name of the company is you can't really, when you don't feel safe, you can't really think. You know what I mean? You can't be present. So, I rarely go to church anymore. So for those of you who go to church all the time, you're going to probably hate me. I don't go a lot. But I every time I go, I wonder, Is somebody going to come in the back door? I have no idea. I never, these are thoughts that never went through my head. I think about it with the schools, even if there were police officers in the schools, I still think about that. And just this, this thing in our country over the last, like I said, 25 or so years, where just things have become unsafe. Going to a concert is unsafe. My one of the first, it was probably the second time my daughter went to a Red Sox game where my wife had taken her. There was a bunch of kids from the school, and they went to a Red Sox game. They sat out in the bleachers, and on the way out, and my daughter might have been, I don't know, 7, and some guy is running around the street. So I don't know if he had a gun or was he claiming he had a gun. He's screaming, "I'm going to kill everybody. I'm going to kill everybody." And she's just, it's her first time walking down Brookline Ave in chaos. And my wife's in a panic, and the people are running everywhere. I'm like, we're just in a different kind of world. And I know that's probably happened forever, but it just seems to be more common now. And these are the things I think we all have to seriously think about. It's frightening. It's absolutely frightening. So when you don't feel safe, how can you be present? How can you be at your best from a thinking perspective? And I don't know, that's kind of what for years in staffing, just check the background checks. Okay. Do the drug checks, do the credit checks in the file. You don't think about it. And today I just think we got to be thinking about it at a much heightened level. And the other thing I would say is, you've got to give yourself an out. So if I'm willing to if I'm willing to give you a second chance, I'm willing to suspend my beliefs about your past, then our agreement means we always have to feel safe around each other. And the minute you don't, it's done. And I wonder to what extent can you leverage that? That's really what this is about. We need to feel good about, we need to trust each other, feel safe around each other. If I don't feel safe, you can't be here anymore. And is that too hardcore? Is that too black and white? Is that a fair agreement or no?
Well, it certainly sounds like one to me. I mean, like you said, I mean, you can't, how can you expect me as your employee to be productive if you're not providing me with a safe work environment?
Right.
In my office, the people can't just walk in. The door's locked, and they have to be buzzed in, and we have to see who they are, and we have to be, in most cases, expecting them before they arrive, because, with background screening, oftentimes we're seen as the impediment to someone getting their dream job, and that can certainly cause anger. So I have to think about that for my employees. They all have panic buttons underneath their desks now in 18 plus years, no one's ever pushed the button. And I hope that they never do. And chances are they won't. But it's there, and it provides that level of comfort. Somebody knows that, they can do that. Help will be on the way, if it's needed.
Isn't that kind of frightening, though? I mean, when you really think about it, what your company does is it just gathers information about somebody that happened. And here's a picture of what happened. You're just saying, here's what they did or didn't do. Here you go. It exists. The information exists. And yet you have to, at some level, think about your own safety because of maybe something I did. And now like it doesn't, anyone could show an organization that information. Isn't that like, it's crazy.
Yeah, well, as you know, life doesn't always make sense. And so, I think about it because I want to provide that level of safety and security for my employees. And I want them to know that it's important to me. And their safety is first. But we get calls from people that are angry saying, I've had background checks in the past and that stuff never showed up before. Why did you uncover it? Well, they're not usually in the mood for a in-depth conversation at that point. But the answer is there is no such thing as a standard background check. Just because you undergo one over here doesn't mean that the next time the same thing's going to show up. Some employers want a deeper dive, and some of them will say, I know it's going to cost me a little bit more, but I don't want to take a chance on missing a record. So, if there are additional levels that you can add to my screening package, I want you to do it.
Right.
Others will say, nah, I want to do something. I want to, be able to show that I took some precautions, but I don't want to go over the top here. Let's keep the budget down. So, that's a conversation we have with each new client. So when I get that call with someone saying, well, maybe, the last time you applied for a job, they did a cursory background check so they could check the box. But they didn't really care about doing the deep dive. And now you've run into an employer that does. That's not our fault. But of course, you're right. That's often seen as if it's our fault.
Right.
And we're the easy scapegoat at that point to direct their anger at.
Right. And it's something I was talking to somebody recently about something that they said and did, and they were upset with me for knowing it. Like, but you did it. I didn't do it. you did it, and you brought it up to me, and now I know it, but you did it. So I don't know what else to say. Like, I'm not judging you. I'm like, but it ain't mine to carry. It's yours to carry. So it's kind of, you live in that world where we're a mirror of what you've done. Here it is, it is what it is. Right. I mean, but it's probably, I'm sure it can be stressful at times. So tell me, what kind of companies come to you, Dave, for help? It's not just companies; it's also architects. It's just paint a picture of the types of entities that might want to leverage your services.
Well, for the background screening, I get asked this a lot, in networking situations, and what's a good referral for you? And really anybody with employees. It used to be that there were certain segments where people that had employees working with the public, those were more apt to want to do a good background check. But now, with all the things that we've been talking about for the last several minutes, workplace violence can show up anywhere. Dishonesty can show up anywhere, and it can be devastating to an employer. So I have startups. I've had friends who have started up a business a couple of years ago, and then they'll call me and say, "Dave, I'm ready to start hiring. I'm going to hire my first employee. What do I do? How do I do the background check?" And frankly, we're doing one background check and they're not going to hire anybody else for another 6 months. I'm probably losing money on doing those, but we do them because it's important. And you want to, that's what we're in business for, is to help people and to create safer places, to sound a little corny with the name there.
What about apartment buildings, or you do work with them as they vet tenants or possible tenants?
Yeah, we do. Actually, interesting that you mentioned that, because apartment buildings are kind of the trifecta for us. They hire employees, so they do employee background checks. They rent to tenants, and they certainly want to do tenant background checks. And also with apartment complexes, they're a really good customer for our consulting division, because they're either installing or upgrading security systems, camera systems. A lot of times, if you don't know what you're doing with a camera system, you call up a company that installs them, and you take the lowest bid, and you find out quickly that, yeah, you can have one camera cover that whole parking lot. But you're gonna end up, when somebody gets their windshield broken out, and you go to find out who did it, you're going to be seeing this little image of this person that's so far away that you can't get any details on them. Mm-hmm. And so those are the kind of things, when we're designing systems, you find out, well, what's important to you. Do you want to be able to identify people, or do you just want to be able to see that something happened? Right. And when they say, well, I want to identify them, well, then we explain what's needed for that. And it's no longer just, okay, I'm not going to just go out and take the low bid. I'm going to have you guys design a system that will work for us.
Do you have any data, and it's probably an unfair question, but any data on the odds of something going wrong once the decision is made to take a chance, either at a company or an apartment complex?
No, I wish I did, though. That would be great marketing materials.
Well, the reason one of the things, my wife's a realtor, like part-time, and she loves it. But there have been times, over the last year where she's like texted me from an open house, and she's like, there are people lingering outside. I don't feel right. Like there's something going on out there. I don't like, and I've just gone to the house as a potential by or just walking around, and it just creates a distraction. So I don't have to say I'm with her, but there've been times where she's felt uncomfortable in these homes. And I know in the past, there've been realtors who've gone into homes and gotten hurt and worse. Do you ever work with real estate companies? I mean, they're sending their people into homes. Sometimes they don't know what they're walking into. There was, there's some weird stuff going on in homes.
Yeah, not to scare you, but I'm sure you already know this, but realtors is one of the more dangerous professions because of that, because they're often alone with strangers. Yep. And so, yeah, our consulting division, we actually offer training classes for those types of situations. And I'm sure your wife knows all these things, but you always open the door and allow them to go in front of you. You never go into an empty unit to show them and have the door locked behind you. You want to have that door ajar so it's easy for you to get out quickly, and you're not fumbling with doorknobs and things to get out quickly if you have to. So yeah, those are things that we get into in the consulting division. We've done a lot of classes with property management companies. So, maintenance people going into occupied units. And what are they going to find when they get in there? Sometimes, they'll go in and there'll be a firearm on the kitchen counter, or there'll be some illegal contraband drugs or something, in plain sight, or, just somebody, just off their meds that day and not acting quite right. How do they deal with that? And that's something, if you're in one of those type of professions, you have to think about.
Yeah, I heard a story from somebody not too long ago that they went into a home and there were 7 guns laid out as the open house was going on. And those are things that should, those are things you discuss with the seller. But this was a bad situation, and nothing ever happened, and they were cleared out. But there were people walking through the house with guns on display, wide open, not locked up. So I would think that at some level, your organization could help that whole industry to some extent and help prep them. And that sounds like you're doing some of that. Anything I haven't asked you, Dave? I've enjoyed the conversation, because I think it's in my experience, it's been a box checking exercise over the years. And I think over the last, 5, 6, 7 years, especially, it's something that needs to be taken much, much more seriously. Not that it ever wasn't serious, but there's a lot to this, and I hope everyone's thinking about it. But is there anything I haven't asked you?
No, I think we've covered it pretty well. And thank you for doing that. I guess I would just say that there are still companies that just want to check the box. I get calls occasionally from companies that say, we've never done background checks, but now I have a client who's not allowing me to send my employees. I have to send my employees into my client's location, workspace, to do our work. And they say I can't send them in there unless they've had a background check. That can be a difficult conversation, because I'll say, okay, are you did they give you a definition of background check? Did they define what they want done? Because if they didn't, what this person calling me is going to do then is just, they want to check the box. They want to get this account. They want to keep their overhead low. So, they'll do the cheapest thing. So I tell them that you really should check with them and ask them to define what they want for a background check. And if I'll talk to them directly if you want me to. But yeah, it's easy to just check the box and say, yep, I did a background check, or I did a drug test. Even drug tests are getting difficult to you can say you do a drug test, but again, what are you testing for? Right. It used to be they said, oh, I want the 9-panel drug test. And there was a standard 9-panel drug test. Now that didn't include the synthetic opioids that we see on the street today and being abused so much. So now you could do that same old standard 9-panel drug test and be missing somebody that's got a really serious problem.
So that doesn't surface? Those don't surface?
No, you have to. So now we're customizing drug panels for our clients. The one that I usually recommend, because I'm not a drug expert and neither are my clients usually. So what I usually recommend is what they call the DOT-like. So the Department of Transportation has always had a requirement for drug and alcohol testing. And so they had the 5-panel drug test, and then people added over the years and they get up to that 9-panel. But with the synthetic opioids that are now so prevalent, the DOT finally said, you know what, our 5 panel doesn't cover those, and so they've added those in. And so they've got the drugs that are the most prevalent on there, and they've got the backing of the federal government to come up with what is the most likely drugs of abuse and all that. So that's what I usually end up recommending to my clients, unless they're in some kind of a specialized area. So if my client is a dentist or a doctor's office, and I'll ask them, well, what drugs do your employees have access to? Those are the ones you probably want to be testing for. If they're working in a gym, maybe you want to test for drugs that athletes commonly abuse.
In the last 18 years, do people test positive today more so than they did 18 years ago?
It's up slightly right now since marijuana has been legalized, but it's hard to answer that question because we saw more and more tests positive for marijuana, but now I have more and more clients dropping marijuana from the testing panels.
Right, yeah, because it's legal in a lot of places. Is there any other areas where you've seen an uptick or a decline? Either creditworthiness or crime or, I don't know, some of these other things?
No, I guess the only thing that is the social media. And that's something that I think that clients are still struggling with. They want to see what's in there. And I think rightfully so, because I think it is a good window into a person's character. What they post or like or share, on their social media accounts. And we've seen amazing things on there, people bragging about, I spent the weekend shoplifting and not getting caught, and they post that, or, pictures of the party that they were at with the picture of the cocaine on the coffee table. Some people, to me, that's an IQ test if you're posting stuff like that. But even just, hate speech or bullying and so forth, it's a little bit harder though, because, where do you draw that line? And so to me, I just tell clients, look at what we set filters, we're going to look for the things that are actionable and omit the things that you should not be considering. Think of it as a conversation starter. So, look at the social media posts and then go have a talk with the person and you'll be able to judge pretty quickly usually.
The social media thing is difficult because the way in which, say, you perceive it, I perceive it, a 30-something perceives it, a 20-something and a teen is so different, like the things that were normal when we were, teens and 20s and 30s are no longer normal. So the norm today has changed so much. And the things that are acceptable to publicly share have changed dramatically. I mean, we grew up in an environment where, for the most part, everyone hid what they were doing wrong. And today it's more, we're going to advertise what we're doing wrong and dare you to call us out on it. And so, and I don't know that the typical young person specifically, I mean, there's some older people that post some stupid stuff out there too. So I shouldn't segment, but I don't know that they're prepared to really deal with the public scrutiny of these stupid decisions. You can't stop judgment from coming at you. So if you choose to post this or say that or hate this or whatever, you're on your own, and now you're up against every single person or employer's interpretation of what they think that meant and who they think you are. So I think that's where a lot of the struggle is on social media, is people are forced to face what others have decided they are based on their choices.
Well, yeah, and I think that's the hardest thing for a young person to realize is, you hear them say, well, it's my right. I can post anything I want. Well, you're right. It is. You can absolutely post anything you want, but you have to also realize there are consequences. And I think that's probably the hardest lesson for some people to learn. You have the right to do it, but you better be prepared for the consequences.
I would agree. That's why I don't post my cocaine pictures, Dave. I stopped doing that.
Good choice, Dave.
Yeah. I said that's not worth it. Dave Sawyer, thank you so much for being with me. I really enjoyed this. My goal is to get this up within the next week, and I appreciate you taking the time with me.
Great. Glad to do it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We'll talk soon, Dave. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.